Adam Gray stood by the massive panoramic window, gazing at the dazzling night view of New York City. His penthouse, perched on the top floor of a modern skyscraper, exuded an air of perfection, minimalist decor, impeccable order, and cold lighting. In his hand, he held a glass of whiskey, yet even its warm bitterness could not dull the memories that haunted him on these long, lonely evenings. Once upon a time, Adam had been a different man. Just a few years ago, he had believed in love, trusted people, and was convinced that his future lay in stability and family. But one day, the world he had built so carefully shattered into a million pieces. She betrayed him. Sophia, the woman he had loved with all his heart, the one he had imagined growing old with, had given her heart, and more, to another man. And that man had been his business partner, someone he had trusted as much as himself. Adam could never forget that fateful evening. He had come home early, only to hear voices, low whispers, but clear enough to leave no room for doubt. He didn't step in right away. He stood there, silently, listening as his beloved laughed with the man he had considered a friend. When he finally pushed open the bedroom door, Sophia didn't even try to explain or justify herself. She merely looked at him with the same calm expression that he had once found so enchanting. From that moment on, Adam stopped believing in love. He hardened himself, devoted his life to business, and made wealth his only priority. He learned to control his emotions, to keep people at a distance, and soon his name became synonymous with success in the financial world. Women to him were nothing more than dangerous deceivers wrapped in beauty. His heart was now armored, and no one could penetrate its walls. But one evening, in the opulent ballroom of the Ritz Hotel, where New York's elite gathered for yet another charity gala, everything changed. Adam disliked these events, but they were a necessary evil. He remained on the periphery, listening to mindless conversations about investments, politics, and gossip. Then, his gaze landed on her. Ellie Bennett was different from every woman in the room. Her laughter was genuine, her gaze rebellious, her movements utterly unrefined for such an elegant evening. She was a storm among artificial smiles and calculated greetings. Her auburn hair cascaded in wild waves over her shoulders, and her eyes sparkled with mischief. She was bold, independent, and utterly indifferent to the attention around her, which only made Adam notice her more. "You've been watching me," she said when their eyes finally met. "Maybe," he replied with the hint of a smirk. "You look like you regret coming here at least 10 times already," she continued, taking a sip of champagne. 15, to be precise. Ellie laughed, and something inside Adam shifted, something long buried, something he had forgotten existed. But Adam Gray was not a man who easily succumbed to emotions. Meanwhile, one of his acquaintances, Lucas, a seasoned shark in the financial world, was observing them closely. Noticing the subtle game unfolding between Adam and Ellie, he smirked and leaned in. "I bet you can't turn her into a perfect lady in 3 months." Adam narrowed his eyes. He despised being challenged. But even more than that, he hated losing. "And what's the wager?" he asked, his gaze still fixed on Ellie. $2 million. The guests around them fell silent, anticipation thick in the air. Everyone knew Adam Gray never backed down from a challenge. He looked at Ellie, who at that moment had no idea how drastically her life was about to change. She was untamed, wild, and unbreakable. But would she remain that way after 3 months in a world where every move was calculated, every word a strategy, and every gesture a piece of a much larger game? "Deal," Adam said, sealing a bet that was far more than just money. Ellie, blissfully unaware, had no idea that the next 3 months would test her like never before. Every great transformation begins with resistance, and Ellie Bennett was no exception. The morning after the gala, she awoke in her small loft apartment in Brooklyn, blissfully unaware of the wager that had been placed upon her. Meanwhile, Adam Gray sat in his sleek office overlooking Manhattan, scrolling through dossiers his assistant had prepared. Ellie Bennett, 26, an artist by passion, rebel by nature, and a socialite by necessity. She came from old money, but had deliberately distanced herself from high society. No steady career, no structured ambitions, an unpredictable storm. He leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. 3 months to turn chaos into elegance. It was no easy task, but Adam thrived on control, and control was exactly what he intended to establish. By noon, Ellie's world shifted. A formal invitation arrived at her doorstep, one without an RSVP option. It bore the seal of Gray Enterprises, accompanied by a note in precise handwriting. Be ready by 7. I'll send a car. Age? Curious, but wary. Ellie toyed with the idea of ignoring it altogether. But something about the cryptic nature of it intrigued her. At exactly 7, a sleek black town car arrived, its driver unfazed by her skepticism. She slipped inside, her defiant smirk barely masking her unease. The ride took her through the glittering veins of the city, stopping in front of an exclusive penthouse restaurant that she had only heard of but never cared to visit. The moment she stepped inside, she saw him, Adam Gray, poised, confident, and infuriatingly unreadable. You came, he noted, standing as she approached. Let's call it morbid curiosity, Ellie countered, sliding into the chair across from him. The dinner that followed was less of a meal and more of an unspoken battle. Adam, precise and calculated, studied her reactions, while Ellie, unpredictable and sharp, refused to be molded into his expectations. Every question he asked was met with a challenge, every suggestion with defiance. But Adam had dealt with far more difficult negotiations in boardrooms, and he wasn't about to let a rebellious artist rattle him. You're reckless, he finally said, swirling the last of his wine. And you're insufferably rigid, she shot back, tilting her head. Then let's make this interesting. Adam placed his glass down, his gaze locking onto hers. For the next 3 months, you let me show you my world. No arguments, no refusals. At the end, if you hate it, you walk away. Ellie hesitated. She had nothing to lose, except, perhaps, her freedom. But the way he looked at her, with quiet challenge and undeniable intrigue, made her pulse quicken. Fine, she relented, leaning back with a smirk. But don't expect me to make it easy for you. Adam allowed himself a rare smile. I wouldn't have it any other way. And so it began, a battle of wills, a wager neither of them truly understood, and a game that had far higher stakes than either of them realized. The first week of their arrangement was nothing short of a power struggle. Adam had arranged a rigid schedule, mornings dedicated to etiquette lessons, afternoons spent shadowing his meetings, evenings filled with galas and business dinners. Ellie, however, resisted every step of the way. On Monday morning, she arrived at her first lesson, dressed in ripped jeans and combat boots. The etiquette coach, a silver-haired woman named Margaret Sinclair, barely hid her disapproval. I take it we're learning how to balance teacups today, Ellie quipped, slouching into a chair. Margaret gave her a withering look. We're learning refinement, Miss Bennett. A skill I assume you lack. Ellie shot at him a smirk, but he merely raised a brow, unfazed. Try to keep an open mind, he said, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed. Margaret proceeded to teach her everything from posture to diction, but Ellie refused to make it easy. She slumped in her seat, mimicked the proper phrases with exaggerated precision, and at one point, dramatically toppled her teacup, just to test Margaret's patience. By Wednesday, Adam had had enough. You don't have to like it, he told her, standing in the hallway outside his office after yet another failed lesson. But I expect you to respect it. Ellie tilted her head, assessing him. And if I don't? His gaze darkened. Then we renegotiate the terms. A challenge. One she wasn't quite ready to lose. So, she played along. That night, when he took her to a high-profile charity event, she wore the gown he had chosen, let him introduce her to important figures, and even attempted polite conversation. For a moment, Adam almost believed she was adapting. Then, midway through the evening, she stole a bottle of champagne from the bar and vanished onto the rooftop. Adam found her minutes later, perched on the ledge, watching the city lights. He sighed, stepping beside her. You do realize this isn't a game, don't you? Ellie took a slow sip from the bottle before handing it to him. Maybe it should be. For the first time in years, Adam took a drink straight from the bottle. And for the first time in years, he laughed. Neither of them realized how dangerous that was. The weeks that followed were a blur of late-night conversations, stolen glances, and an undercurrent of tension that neither of them could define. Adam had expected resistance from Ellie, but what he hadn't expected was her ability to unravel him. One evening, after yet another tiresome gala, Adam drove them back to his penthouse. The city glowed beneath them as they stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, a comfortable silence settling between them. Ellie had kicked off her heels, swirling a glass of wine in her hand, her auburn hair slightly tousled from the wind outside. "You surprise me," Adam admitted, his voice quieter than usual. Ellie smirked, taking a sip. "That's a first. You seem like the kind of man who has seen it all." "Perhaps," he mused, watching her. "But you don't fit into any of my calculations." She turned to face him fully, tilting her head. "Is that a good thing or a bad thing?" "I haven't decided yet." For the first time, Ellie saw something unguarded in his eyes, something raw, as if he were standing at the edge of a decision he wasn't ready to make. The next day, their arrangement took a dramatic turn. Adam had a meeting with influential investors, and Ellie was expected to accompany him. She had done her best to blend into his world, but this time, she hesitated. "Do you ever get tired of it?" she asked as they stood outside the towering glass building. "The constant pretending?" Adam's jaw tensed. "It's not pretending. It's control." Ellie studied him, searching for cracks in his carefully constructed walls. "That sounds exhausting." His gaze flickered to her, a rare moment of vulnerability slipping through. "It is." That evening, instead of another high society event, Adam took Ellie somewhere unexpected, a quiet jazz bar tucked away in a forgotten part of the city. The atmosphere was warm, filled with the rich sound of a saxophone and the murmurs of intimate conversations. Ellie leaned in, her eyes glimmering with curiosity. "Why here?" Adam exhaled, looking around. "Because sometimes I need to remember that there's more to life than strategy." She smiled, a genuine, soft smile. "And what am I?" "Another strategy." For once, Adam didn't have an answer. As the night unfolded, the line between their wager and something deeper blurred. Ellie challenged everything he thought he knew about himself, and Adam found himself drawn to the chaos she represented. He didn't just want to change her anymore. He wanted to understand her. But what neither of them knew was that someone else had been watching them, waiting for the perfect moment to intervene. The past had a way of catching up, and for Adam Gray, it was about to come crashing down. Ellie should have known better than to believe the world Adam Gray lived in wouldn't come with consequences. A week after their night at the jazz bar, a mysterious envelope arrived at Adam's office. He read the contents in silence, his expression darkening with each line. That evening, Ellie found him staring at the city skyline, the weight of something unspoken pressing down on his shoulders. "What happened?" she asked cautiously. Adam turned, his usual composure slightly frayed. "There are people who don't want me to change," he said flatly. Ellie frowned. "What does that even mean?" Instead of answering, he handed her the letter. The moment she skimmed the words, her blood ran cold. It was a warning, a threat. Someone knew about her, about them, and they weren't pleased. "I told myself I wouldn't let this happen," Adam muttered, running a hand through his hair. "I told myself I'd never let someone have enough power over me to be used as a weapon." Ellie inhaled sharply. "So what now?" Adam met her gaze, something unreadable in his expression. "Now we find out who's behind this." Over the next few days, Adam's demeanor shifted. He was more distant, more guarded. But beneath the surface, Ellie could see the storm brewing. She wasn't naive. She knew the world Adam was part of wasn't just business deals and galas. It was power, control, and silent battles fought in high-rise offices. Then, one night, everything came to a head. Ellie was walking back to her apartment when she felt it. Eyes on her, the unmistakable sensation of being followed. She turned a corner and quickened her pace. But before she could react, a strong hand grabbed her arm. She gasped, trying to twist free, but a voice, smooth and chilling, stopped her. "Miss Bennett, I'd suggest you listen carefully." The man in front of her was well-dressed, his demeanor calm but threatening. "You've had your fun, but it's time you step aside. Adam Gray is not a man who can afford distractions." Ellie's pulse pounded. "And if I don't?" The man smirked. Then we make sure you do." With that, he released her, vanishing into the shadows as quickly as he had appeared. Shaken but furious, Ellie didn't go home. Instead, she went straight to Adam's penthouse. She stormed inside, her heart still racing. "Who the hell did you piss off this time?" she demanded. Adam turned sharply, instantly alert. "What happened?" Ellie relayed the encounter, watching as his expression darkened. "That's it," he said, grabbing his coat. "This ends now." Ellie grabbed his arm. "Adam, wait." But he was already gone, a man on a mission, a man who had just realized that the game he thought he was playing was far more dangerous than he had anticipated. Adam drove through the city with a clenched jaw, his mind racing. He had spent years building a life of precision, control, and predictability. Ellie had been the unexpected element, the variable he hadn't accounted for, and now she was in danger because of him. He pulled up outside an old warehouse in the industrial district, stepping into the dimly lit interior. Inside, a man was waiting for him, a man Adam had known all too well from his past dealings. "You should have stayed in your lane, Gray," the man sneered. "People like you don't get second chances." Adam smirked, despite the tension tightening in his chest. "And yet here I am, making my own rules." The confrontation was brief but decisive. Adam made it clear that he would not be threatened, and he had the power to make life very difficult for those who thought otherwise. When he walked out of the warehouse that night, he knew one thing: Ellie was not going to be a casualty in his war. Back at his penthouse, Ellie paced the living room, her frustration mounting with each passing minute. When Adam finally returned, she rushed to him, eyes blazing. "You don't get to make decisions for me, Adam. I deserve to know what's going on." He sighed, rubbing his temple. "I was trying to protect you." "Maybe I don't need protecting," she shot back. "Maybe I just need you to trust me." Something in her words hit him harder than he expected. For years, Adam had relied on control, on keeping his distance. But Ellie had forced her way past those walls, and now he had a choice to make. "Fine," he conceded, stepping closer. "Then let's fight this together." In the days that followed, Adam and Ellie became an unbreakable force. She was no longer just a player in his world. She was his partner. With her by his side, he confronted those who had tried to control him, dismantled the threats, and reclaimed the power that was truly his. But more than that, he let himself feel. He let himself believe in something more than strategy, more than power. He let himself love. One evening, as they stood on the balcony of his penthouse, overlooking the city, Adam turned to Ellie, his expression softer than she had ever seen. "This was never supposed to happen," he murmured. "You were never supposed to matter this much." Ellie smiled, reaching up to touch his face. "And yet here we are." With a sigh of surrender, Adam leaned down and kissed her. No more bets, no more calculations. Just them and the promise of something real. Because in the end, love had been the one thing neither of them had planned for. And yet, it was the only thing that had ever truly mattered. A year later, Ellie stood in the very same jazz bar where everything had changed. She glanced around the dimly lit room, remembering the night Adam had first brought her here. That night had been the beginning of something neither of them had been ready for. Adam walked in a moment later, carrying 2 glasses of whiskey. Lost in thought, she smirked, taking one of the glasses. "Just remembering." He leaned in, his voice low. "Then let's make a new memory." She laughed, and as the music played, they danced slow, unhurried, lost in each other. The world outside could wait, because here in this moment, there were no wagers, no past demons, no uncertainties. Just love. And that was enough.